All right, so it is Tuesday night, April 11th, the start of week number 10, and it is 7 o'clock on the East Coast and 4 o'clock out here on the West Coast. And so let's go ahead and start out like we do each week by taking a look at the syllabus to make sure that everybody is on the same page for what we've got due and how many meetings we've got left. So we are now down to the final 5 meetings of the course. And so as you can see here, this is what we're working on this week, and this is going to be due on Monday, April 17th. And so that was in an email sent out today. So we've got 2 lab activities, and I'm going to be covering 747 in depth and probably going to touch on 748. We're going to go over the installation of the CSR 1KV because, again, it does cause a little bit of confusion that we've got multiple files that are going to be required for this installation. There's an OVA file, and then there's an OVA file if you're using VirtualBox. There's an OVA file if you're using VMware. And then there's this ISO file. And so I want to make sure everybody's clear as to how that's going to work. And then I'm going to show you what I do so that the virtual machines just get an IP address from the DHCP server that's on your local network, right, at your house or wherever you're at. And so the 2 activities that we're going to be doing this week are 747 and 748, and then the Module 7 chapter exam. And remember, you get 10 attempts on that chapter exam, and with the max time out at 5 hours per attempt. So make sure you take advantage of those attempts, use it as a learning tool to kind of help you along. And so this is where we now kind of get into the deep end of the pool in terms of the course. Chapter 7, or I should say Module 7 and Module 8, and specifically Module 8, are going to start to introduce some of the most complex material in the course. And Module 8 is definitely the hardest module of all. But there are plenty of supports in place to help ease your path through these 2 modules. But there's definitely some heavy lifting that'll be done here on these 2 modules. So that's what we've got this week. So we meet next Tuesday, the 18th. We meet Tuesday, the 25th. We meet on May 2nd, and we meet on May 9th, and then we meet on May 16th. So there's only 5, including tonight. I believe that's right. Or no, there's 5 additional meetings. Is that right? So 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, so there's 5 meetings after tonight, these synchronous meetings that we have. So keep that in mind. Now, for the groups and the group projects, I will again call your attention to 8.6.9, this project activity here. And this is the final project activity of the course. Now, it is also probably one of the more complex activities in the course that's going to require quite a bit of work. Last week, I talked about making sure that you come to, where are we at, 869, that you come here in the online course and you take a look at that project activity, and we'll give it a second to load here, and read very carefully what it's asking you and your group to do. And let's give it a second here, and there it goes, and of course it goes right by the screen. So let me click on this again here. There we go. So this is what you should be taking a very close look at for this project, right? You're going to be designing a new application for network automation. You're going to use data modeling with Yang. You're going to implement automation with netconf, and you're going to do all of this with Python. And again, we will have done all of this by the time you get there, and there are, again, supports in place and videos that kind of walk you through how you would do all of these things individually. And then it's going to be up to you and your group to read through the scenario and then come up with a Python script and this deliverable right here, right? And again, these are your technical objectives. You're going to use data modeling with Yang. You're going to implement network automation with netconf, and then automate the process using Python. So it's very straightforward, but there is some heavy lifting, and then there is a final deliverable down here of a presentation where you're going to, again, go over your application code that your group used, describe the Yang model chosen, right? Was it an open model or the native model? And everything is right in here that you're going to need. And so again, I would highly recommend that you take a look at this sooner rather than later so that you don't end up waiting until the last minute, because that is a recipe for disaster. And so that's it this week. We've got these 2 labs here with Ansible, both of them Ansible labs. There is another lab that's in there, 763, I think it is, PyATS, but you guys don't have to do that lab. So it's just these 2 labs that are due here, and then the Module 7 chapter exam. And then, as you can see, we're going to ease our way into Module 8. Module 8 is spread out over over 4 weeks. And there's a reason for that, because again, it's that Module 8 is one of the most difficult modules in the course with respect to automation and the things that you're going to be doing. All right, so let's go ahead and level set right here. Any questions on what we're doing this week, what we've got coming up, or anything related to our schedule? And 5 synchronous meetings left. That is it. And then you guys will be off for the summer. All right. If there's no question.
Yeah, I got one.
Sure.
I was late getting my essay in. I emailed that to you today. Did you get my email by any chance?
No, I haven't checked those.
Okay. Because it wouldn't let me upload it in Canvas because it expired last night. So unless you can open it and I can submit it, but I sent it to you in an email.
Yeah, if you send it to me in email, that's okay.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. All right. So no questions on the schedule, where we're at, what we're working on this week. And again, when you take a look at Module 8 here, I highly recommend that you and your groups start on 869, kind of start talking about it, how you guys are going to tackle it. All right. So if there's no questions on that, here's what I want to talk about next. Everyone has been sent the link. It's in an announcement. It's in the email I sent today, and it's in our WebEx Teams room. You guys have the 3 links that you need to download the CSR1KV, right? And that's the Cisco. And so what is a CSR1000V? So the CSR1KV is Cisco's virtual router, right? So instead of a physical router, just like instead of a physical host, like a laptop or like, a server that you would have to have at your house, instead of that, Cisco has a virtual router, which you could spin up with VMware or whatever it is you want to use. You could use VirtualBox as well, and you can run that router. Now, this is the software. You may or may not remember this. This is the software that I had indicated at the beginning of the semester that we are required to let you know that at the end of the course, you should be deleting this software, the CSR1KV, and that you should not try to use this in a production environment, because what we have is sort of a Cisco Networking Academy special CSR1KV that's going to allow us to do some stuff, but there's a lot of things that we're not able to configure, right? So first things first, let's talk about, and I'll walk through the process with VMware, right? So let's take a look at how we would build this with VMware. So here are the 2 files. These are the OVA files. And again, whether you're using VirtualBox or whether you're using VMware, and the names are right there, it's going to be one of these 2 files that you're going to be selecting. And so how I got here was with my VMware Fusion install, I went to File, Import, and then I go to this directory here where I have the OVA files for the CSR1KV. Now, since I'm doing VMware, I would select CSR1000V for VMware.ova. And I'm going to click on Open. Now, you can see I've built this out multiple times in the past. So I'm going to click Continue. Now, in the lab, which was attached to the email I sent today, and it was attached to the Teams message, and it's attached to the announcement in the course in Canvas. That lab is a great resource to follow for how you would approach this installation. And so with VMware, once I've selected that file, I'm going to go ahead over here and I'm going to type in, I'll just say, demo CSR 1000V. You can see that I've created other virtual machines here. I keep them all in this directory I have called virtual machines, so that way they're always there. And I always like to put the date as to when I created it, 2023. And I'm going to click on Save. Now, this is going to open up after it does some magic here. It's going to show me the window where I'm going to be able to make some configuration changes, right? So you can see it imported it there. And so here's where you get the virtual machine summary. So it shows you the guest operating system is 64-bit, 4 gig of memory, the networking, right? It says private to my Mac. And then you've got 2 CD DVDs. Now, you can customize the settings. And what this means is I can click on it. I just clicked on Customize Setting. It's going to open this window up here, which you would see in VMware. So if you wanted to come to where the processors and the memory are at, and again, I'm on this laptop here, which is not the beefiest of laptops. It's a MacBook Pro, but God, this thing's got to be, I think, 5-6 years old by now. And you can see it's only got 4 cores. So I could say, you know what? I want to use 2 cores, right? So I could pick 2 cores. And then I could take a look at the memory here and say, well, I don't want to use 4 gig. What if I wanted to use 8 gig of memory? So I could upgrade, right? Based on the resources available on my physical machine, I could upgrade the amount of resources that I'm going to use for the virtual machine. So I'm not going to do, because this is going to grind it to a halt, my laptop, that is. So I'll leave it at 4 gig there. And we'll leave it at 2 processor cores, because once I've got it up and running, I'm going to switch to the one that I have running on my iMac Pro, which has, I think, like 14 cores or something like that. So again, you could come in here and customize it. Let me show you what I do on the networking side of the house. So for the network adapter, I choose auto detect. And what happens here is it's going to give me a mutually exclusive, unique IPv4 address based on the network that I'm currently on. So like on my wireless router here from Spectrum Internet, it's kind of the ubiquitous 192.168.1.0/24 subnet. So I would end up with an IP address in that subnet, and I'll show you how to check to see which IP address you got assigned, because the scripts that you're writing, the Ansible playbooks that we're going to be configuring, are going to require us to know the IP address of the CSR1KV. And so I always choose auto detect, so it gets its own unique IPv4 address. Now, this is the trickiest part of the install. Remember, you download the OVA file that you need. However, you also need the ISO file. And the ISO file is that CSR1KV ISO image. So I would click on, whoops, sorry, I think I clicked on the wrong thing there. I would click on CD DVD. And you can see here how it has this demo CSR. It has the name that I gave it, but that's not what's needed here. What's needed here is we need to choose a disk or image. And when I do that, it's going to open up this little dialog box here. And I'm looking for 9 dot, what is it? 05. I'm trying to remember there it is right there. So you can see here, I've got all these different versions. And so this, no, it's not 9.16. I think you guys have, well, I'll just use 9.16.12. I think the image that you guys have, I think is like 9.06 or something, or 9.08.05. So I'm just going to use this one here. But this is where you need the ISO file. If you do not indicate the ISO file here, the VM will crash. Well, it won't crash, but it'll stall. The installation and the startup will stall and it won't work. And it's going to tell you that it's missing a file. And so that is, and this will be the file that takes the longest to download, because I think it's 486 megabytes or something like that. So it's half a gig. But that is the file that you need, right? So if we go back to show all, what have we done? So quick summary, we increased the number of processors. We could have increased the memory. I made the network adapter auto detect, so it's going to get its own IPv4 address based on the DHCP server I have on my wireless network here at the house. And then we went to the CD DVD drive and we selected this ISO. And again, without that ISO, none of this is going to work. So once I'm done with that, I could go ahead and click close, and then I can click play, and VMware wants to do the little upgrade thing. So I'll say, okay. And then we'll say, okay. All right. And so what's going to happen is now it's going to go ahead and start up. It's probably going to be a little slow on the uptake here, just because I'm doing this on a laptop that does not have a ton of resources. So we're going to virtually fast forward here. And again, you can see it's going to start up here, but what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to connect up, and I'm going to show you what you're going to see once it's all done and everything is done what we anticipated it would do. And let me get logged in here real quick. And so real quickly, any questions around the VMware setup of the OVA? Again, the lab walks you through the setup as well, but sometimes it helps to see a demonstration. And so here is what you should see once it boots up. And so this one is running 16.12.05, it looks like. And it's running the Gibraltar release of the CSR 1KV. And those are just names that they give the different releases and the different branches of code. So if I was to go into privilege exec mode from user exec with the enable command, the way that you can see the IP address is you would say show IP interface and then brief. And again, it's spacing it out there. Now I've created a whole bunch of loopback addresses on here as part of some other stuff I was doing. But what we're really interested in is that address right there, the gigabit Ethernet 1 address. That is on my local network. Now, again, if I go to the virtual machine settings here, and I click on settings, and we look at the network setting, you'll notice that auto detect is what I've got, what was selected when this was built. And so just like the one that will eventually boot up on my laptop here, hopefully soon, when yours boots up, if you selected auto detect, it's going to get its own IP address, right? And so again, this is one way to do it, and this is how I would recommend that you do it. And you can always change that setting if you desire, if you so desire. But I like to do it like this so that I know exactly what the IP is and that it's on the same network as the host machine and any other machines that I have running, right, that are on my home network. Okay, so that is how you would set up the CSR 1KV. Let me go ahead and hit Q there and be done with that. And again, this is Cisco's virtual router. So if you tried to do something like go into global config with configure terminal, and maybe you wanted to configure router OSPF. Oh, it's going to do this here. Hold on one second. It's adding some characters in. So if I was to say router and then OSPF 1, because maybe I want to configure OSPF, then I could try, to do something like that, right? So we could do OSPF configuration. So it's a router, just like a physical router, except it's virtual, right? It's a virtual machine. All right. So hopefully everybody's feeling good about that. And this VM, this virtual machine, the CSR1KV, is required to complete Lab 747 because we're practicing the backing up of this CS. We're going to be backing this router up is what we're going to be doing with Ansible. And that's why they have you install it and configure it and get it all set up so that we can then transition to the Ansible part of the equation. So let me hit end here and we'll get out of there. And again, if I was to say show run, you'll notice that it's got a configuration. It looks just like a physical router, right? And then we're going to have all of the interfaces down here in just a second. And there's a bunch of crypto stuff. And let's get by all the crypto stuff, hopefully here. There we go. And we get down to all of the interfaces, right? And so you can see there's all kinds of interfaces that have been configured. So when we go to back this router up, we would expect that we're going to get the entire running configuration off of the router. All right. So does everybody feel good there? And again, for the VirtualBox install, the lab 70, I think it's 703, is going to walk you through step by step everything that you need to do. Now, a key point is that you'll notice in a lot of the documentation that it will mention like a 192, 168, 101.56 is the IP that you have on the CSR1KV. If you configured it like I configured it, then you're going to end up with a different address. Now, how would you see the address? You would just say show IP interface brief, right? And then you could see what the address is. That way, when you transition over to the dev ASC virtual machine, and let me go ahead and clear that out. When you transition over to the dev ASC virtual machine, if I try to ping 192.168.1.129, that is my CSR1KV, and I've got connectivity, right? And again, on this virtual machine, it's the same as the CSR1KV, where it's getting its IP address from the DHCP server that's on my wireless network. So let's see whatever happened over here. If we come back over here, and let's go find that VMware. Where is it at? Where's the VMware icon at? Oh, wait, I think I just flew by. There we go. All right, so as you can see, it looks like it's still booting, right? So it's still booting. Again, it's going to take a while because it's on the laptop without a lot of horsepower. But when it comes up, we'll see that the IP address should be a 192.168.1.something here on the home network, right? And that's what you should see as well. Okay, let's transition back over here to the dev ASC virtual machine. So again, remember, we're now working with two mutually exclusive individual virtual machines. And remember, you need that ISO file when you go to build that VM. So very important, very important. All right, so let's talk about infrastructure automation and what that's all about. And the tool that we're focused on, you'll hear they talk about Chef and Puppet and all kinds of different automation tools that you can use. And Python is also a tool that you can use, but they want to talk about Ansible in Module 7. And so Ansible's been around for a very long time. It was originally a Linux tool, and it still is a tool for Linux as well. I think the satellite servers that Linux has, and a satellite server just deals with all of the patches and things like that that Linux, that your Red Hat install might need. And that Ansible plays a part in that, right? Because Ansible will allow us to create what are called playbooks. And in those playbooks, we're going to have a series of plays that we can run, right? And that's, so it's kind of, the analogy is kind of cool. Okay, it's a playbook. And like if we're a football team, we've got this playbook, and inside of it, we've got all the plays that we're going to be running during the season. Well, Ansible kind of uses the same terminology where you create a playbook, you put plays into your playbook, and then you run those plays, right? And those plays are set up in order to, oh, look at that, finally asked about the network portion here. So let me go ahead and put my password in. Hold on one second. I think I mistyped it. All right, so there we go. Hopefully I didn't, of course I had a typo in there. All right. Okay, so the typo's taken care of. All right, so all the networking's now firing up on that virtual machine that we're building out. Okay, so what is Ansible all about? Well, first, on your dev ASC virtual machine, you can CD down to labs, devnet source, Ansible. And let me take a step back here. If I go back up one directory, so in the Ansible directory, you're going to find two subdirectories. The first one's called Ansible-Apache, and that's going to be your lab 748. And then we've got Ansible-CSR 1000V, and that is going to be the first lab 747. So if I cd into Ansible CSR 1KV, and let's clear the screen and let's type ls. I've got a ton of files in here because I've done a bunch of different demonstrations. So you're going to have a couple files that are in here. And one of them is going to be the hosts file. Now, what is inside the hosts file? So let's say more hosts and take a look at that. Now, inside my hosts file, I've got a couple of things that are in there. The very first line is a line you need to be focused on, because this is going to be the line that you would need. And you can see the IP address that's in here, right? 192.168.1.129. That's the IP address of my CSR1KV virtual machine. So that's why if you see reference to that 192.168, I think it's like 56.101 or 101.56, remember, all you have to do is change the IP address, and you can do this inside of VS Code on your virtual machine. All you would have to do is change the IP if the IP of your CSR1KV is different, right? So just change the IP address. Now, these other two machines I've got down here, this ECC switch 1 and ECC switch 2, those are actual physical Cisco routers that I have that my home network is using to run off of. So all of my wireless access points, security cameras, I'm trying to think of anything else I've got. Oh, I've got some routers that are plugged in there as well. So all of those things are plugged into those switches. And so what I'll show you is that you can actually do this on physical devices as well. But so the first things first, right? The hosts file. Now, in a lot of cases, you'll hear this referred to as the inventory file. And all it is, as you can see here, is an inventory of the systems which I want to operate on, right? Or I want to interact with my Ansible playbook. And so for right now, let me go ahead and say VI hosts, and let's comment out the two lines here. And a comment in the host file is simply you just use the pound sign in front of the line there. So we only have that one line, right? Which is that CSR1KV, because that's the device we're interested in backing up. Now, again, you'll hear this referred to as the inventory file. Now, also local in this directory is the Ansible config file. So let's take a look at that, ansible.cfg. And here's the Ansible config file. Now, this is a very trimmed down version of the entire, what you typically would see. And we'll look at the default file. But this basically has some options put into it that are, again, super, super straightforward, right? We're not going to be doing any host key checking, right? For RSA fingerprints, because we don't have any keys configured. The inventory file, right? It's going to be the host file that's located in this current working directory. Retry, right? If you were to get errors, what happens is Ansible will create files with the host name .retry, and if it had any issues. And so maybe we'll change this to true, because I know that somewhere in here I've got a mistake somewhere. And so maybe we can force that mistake and see one of those retry files. But for right now, we're just saying that, hey, we don't need to see those retry files, and we don't want those created, right? So to create the file with a description, explanation as to what happened and what went wrong. So then you've got warnings, right? So we've got all of that is set to false. We don't need to see any of that information. So we're basically setting our Ansible config file, telling it use the hosts file in the current directory, and then disable those other things. Now, by default, there's a directory here, and we can cd into etc Ansible. And if I go ahead and type in ls, let's finish up here. It's kind of lagging. If I type ls, you can see that this is the default sort of directory as to where Ansible gets installed on Ubuntu Linux, is in etc Ansible. And lo and behold, what do we have here? We have an ansible.cfg file and a hosts file. Now, remember, we're going to be working with our playbooks and all of the cool things we're going to be doing in our labs, DevNet source, Ansible directories, which is why we create our own separate Ansible config file and our own hosts file. So if I was to say more ansible.cfg, let's take a look at what's in this file. Well, we're 3% of the way through the file, and take a look at how much stuff is actually inside of this default Ansible CFG file. There is a ton. And there's your host key checking, right? Set to false there at the bottom. But there's a lot of things that are in here. And we don't need all of these things, like the SSH timeout, right? Or the remote underscore user, or the module underscore name. So we don't need all of these things in our ansible.cfg file. So we create our own, right? But this is the default file. And let's take a look at the default hosts file. So if I hit more and we take a look, so here's how you could put in a fully qualified domain name for your host, like green.example.com or blue.example.com. Or you could just drop in the IP address. Now, you can also create a collection of hosts that when we create our playbook, instead of providing a single host name, which is what we start out with, right? We start simple and then we'll build. You could create this group called web servers. And under that, you just list out all of the web servers. And so then in your playbook, you don't say, oh, I'm going to do alpha.example.com and then beta.example.com and then whatever the box is at 192.168.1.100 and .110. No. You create this group called web servers here in the hosts file. And then underneath that, you put your 4 web servers. And then in your playbook, you simply refer to web servers as the host, as in the hosts file that you're referencing. And then your playbook knows, oh, he's referring to the 4 servers that he's got configured in here. And so then that's what you would use. And so again, these are just sort of basic examples. You can see they got a DB database server, right? Maybe you want to do a database server group. And then up here, take a look. They've got, you can do patterns, right? So we're looking for www.001 or 002 or 003, all the way up to 006.example.com. So there's some cool things that can be gleaned by looking at the default config files that are here. Again, we start very small, simple examples, but there's a lot that you can do with Ansible. I mean, Ansible is very, very powerful, super powerful tool. Okay, so you might be wondering, all right, so you just showed me the Etsy Ansible directory and the ansible.cfg file and the hosts file, but we also have that back over here in labs, DevNet source Ansible, right? And actually, let me go down to Ansible CSR1KV because that's what we're interested in right now. So you might be wondering, okay, well, how is it that the Ubuntu Linux, when I go to run the command, how does it know which Ansible config file it's supposed to look at? And when you run a playbook, Ansible follows 3 simple rules. Or I think of it like an order of operations, right? It's going to follow the following, right? I'm going to say Ansible-playbook. I'm going to give it the name of the playbook. And then I can even specify the hosts file. When I do that, it's going to look for the Ansible config file first in the current working directory, which is why you're going to set Ansible up like we're doing here in this Ansible-CSR1KV directory and then the Ansible-Apache directory. Because when I run my playbook that says, hey, I want you to do this, Ansible, it looks here for that Ansible.cfg file. So let's say Ansible.cfg. So here's what's in that file again. I'm telling it where to find the inventory file with the hosts that I want to interact with. And then I give it some basic checks here that I'm telling it, turn this off, right? Turn these 3 things off. So it's going to look here first. If I didn't have it configured in the current working directory, so let's say that there's no Ansible.cfg file here, then what is it? What's Ansible going to do next? Well, next, it's going to look to see if you have this environment variable set for the Ansible CFG file. Now, we don't have that set. We're not going to set it. So that it would fail there, right? It would be like, well, that's not set. So then it has its fallback. And as you might have guessed, the fallback is to look at the Etsy Ansible directory to try to find the Ansible.cfg file, which by default, it's in there. But again, you saw, I mean, that thing's got to be 200-300 lines long. I mean, just jam-packed with comments and descriptions and settings and things like that. So again, Ansible is going to look in the current working directory by default, just like we've got it set up right here. We've got our own little Ansible.cfg. Then it's going to look for this environment variable, which we don't have set as part of our bash shell. And then it'll fall back ultimately to the Etsy directory. All right, so that's what Ansible is, right? This is how we've got it set up on our Ubuntu boxes. And so now let's talk about the playbook, right? Because the playbook is kind of where all of the action happens. And if, I'm sorry, we're going to look at the host file one more time. Before we get to the playbook, I want yeah. So we want to look at the host file, the inventory file. Sorry about that. I was jumping ahead. So we want to look at the inventory file and we want to talk about these things that are in here, right? The CSR1KV, right? That is just some name that you can come up with. I could have called it, my Cisco router, but I'm going to reference that in the playbook. So think of this as like an alias that you're going to use in your playbook when you go to run the plays that are in that playbook. And so when I tell my playbook, yeah, use CSR1KV out of the hosts file, right? It's going to look for this entry here. So the next thing we have is Ansible underscore user. Now, that's just a user that's configured on the CSR1KV. So there's a user on there, username Cisco, and you guys may be familiar with that command. If you go into global config, you can type in username space Cisco space password space whatever to give it a very simple password. And so Ansible underscore password, that's the password for the user. And then Ansible underscore host is the IP address of the CSR1KV, right? So now let's go ahead and talk about the playbook, because the playbook is where all of the action is going to happen, right? So let's clear the screen here. Whoops, I typed out way too many C's. All right, so we'll clear the screen here, and I'm trying to remember, what do we got here? And I think I called it Backup Cisco Router Playbook is what I think it should be. So let's take a look at that. So we'll say more backup underscore, whoops, underscore Cisco. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure this is the playbook that you guys are also, yeah, this is it right here. Okay. So we're going to go line by line here, because these things are, there's all kinds of little semantics inside the file. Now, this is, and let me ask, does anybody know what format this file is in? Because it's not a Python file, right? Does anybody know the format that this file is in? Just dump it into the chat real quick if you do know. Yeah, Christy, perfect. So it's YAML. Right? Yet another markup language, right? So it's another kind of programming language that we need to be exposed to here. Now, the good thing about YAML is that it's pretty simple and it's pretty easy to read. It can get complicated, but what we're going to be doing is pretty straightforward. So first things first. Right up here at the very top, the start of the file, or after the comments that I have there with the pound signs, right here, you've got this dash, dash, dash. And what that is indicating is that that tells you that is the start of a YAML file. Now, in the lab, I believe they tell you that, and I don't know if they use the words must or should, but it's good practice to put this in at the top of the file. Does it have to be there? The answer is no, right? But this is a good best practice, because this indicates that this is the start of my document, my YAML document, the 3 dashes. Say, hey, YAML document starting right here. And then we have the rest of our configuration information in there. Now, remember, I just talked earlier about, well, what if I had like 2 hosts that I wanted to do this on? Well, you could create another document, but here's the trick, right? Is in YAML, the 3 dashes in a single file separate the documents. So what I could do is I could come down to the file, where I'm at right there. I'm sorry. Thought I was in the file. I could come down right here in that file, right here to right to that line right there, and put dash, 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 and then do a backup with these same commands in here, but tell it, oh, in the host file, you're not looking for CSR1KV, you're looking for, router 99, right? So in the same YAML file, you can have what they refer to as different documents. And that's how you separate the documents. The confusion comes in, because when we refer to documents, what's everybody think? Oh, well, yeah, if it's a document, it's a separate file. Well, here with YAML, we simply separate what YAML calls documents with the 3 dashes, okay? So best practice is we put the 3 dashes up here at the top. The next thing is we've got, and again, this is our playbook, right? So here is the name of my first play, right? The name of the play is going to be automatic backup of running config. And you'll see that when we run this, that is actually going to be printed out to the screen. Now, the next line down, and these, let me take a step back. So that's the name of the play. Now, this is what is referred to as an object in YAML. And you can think of it as, and again, think of it as an analogous to the key value pair that you're familiar with from Python, right? Our key value pairs are separated by colons. And so here we have objects, right? So the hosts, well, what host do I want to run this on? Well, or do I want to interact with? The CSR1KV, right? Now, remember, that is the exact same name that we have, that we have in our hosts file. So these need to match. So if you change that name to, let's say, Dwayne's cool CSR1KV in the hosts file, you would need to have the same name here, or else when it goes to look, when Ansible goes to look at your hosts file, it's going to be looking for Dwayne's cool router, and it's not there, right? If you left the name of CSR1KV, and then it's going to bomb. It's going to fail. All right, gather facts. This is sort of a legacy thing here. Well, I don't want to say legacy, but it was originally something that was done with Linux boxes and the copying of Python modules. So we're just setting that to false. We don't need to do that here. And then connection : local. Now, this is, again, one of the semantics of Ansible. The lab will state that it says that what that means is that you're not using SSH, therefore the connection is local. And that gives you the impression that, oh, well, Ansible's just like somehow magically connecting to the CSR1KV. And that is not what's happening here. What this means is that Ansible is not running the SSH process. You are connecting, right? Because again, if we look at that hosts file, right? Let me see if I got that. When we look at the hosts file, why do I need the username, the password, and the IP address? SSH is being used. It's just when you say connection : local, it's not Ansible that's doing it, right? That's what that means. So again, it gets kind of confusing when you see that statement that it says, oh, you're not using SSH. Well, Ansible's not doing the SSH. You are using SSH to connect to the box. It's just that Ansible is not doing it. So let's go back to, actually, let me do the more backup keys here. There we go. Okay. All right. So that's the start. So that's our first play, right? And then we get down to tasks. Now, tasks indicates what we're doing, like what are the actions that we're taking in this play that's in my playbook, right? So right now we have a single play that makes up this entire playbook. And the play is called automatic backup of running config. So we know what hosts is, the gather facts, the connection. We get into the tasks, and then we have a name for the task, display the running config. Now, the next thing is that we're going to be using iOS commands. Now, that is an Ansible module that is created that gives us access to Cisco commands. So we say, yeah, so I want to use the iOS command module, and what are the commands that I'm going to run? Well, I'm going to do show running config. Now, this can be a little complicated down here as well. This register : config. You'll notice when you look down here for this content object, right, it says config.standardout0. Well, this register config, all that's doing is it's creating a variable that's going to capture the output of the show running config command. And what is the output of that command? Well, the output of the show running config command is my running config, right? The configuration that I'm trying to back up here. And so what we're doing is we're capturing that output in the variable named config. And then you can see here, the next task in here is save the output to the /backups directory. And so I'm going to create a copy. And then the content is going to be what? The output of that variable to this, what would come to standard out, which is the running config of the router. Now, I've kind of spiced this up a little bit down here. You can see that what it was initially going to do was it was going to send to the destination, right? And remember, the destination is going to be the backups directory, which is in the current working directory I have here. And then we were going to call the backup show underscore run underscore CSR1KV, which is the inventory host name, right? That's a variable. That's the inventory host name that we're using, which is a CSR1KV .txt. Now, the question that comes up is, okay, so what happens when I run the backup a second time? Yeah, it's going to overwrite the file that you just had there. Now, maybe that's what you want to do. But 9 times out of 10, that is not what you want to do. You want to create little, I want to say, this is a check mark, but that's not the word I'm looking, checkpoint is the word I'm looking for. You want to create like little checkpoint configurations. So maybe, you know, and again, you could create a shell script that runs this Ansible playbook for you auto-magically, like maybe once a week, or maybe it runs it at the end of every business day, Monday through Friday, or maybe it runs a backup on Sunday of your router so that you always have a good backup. Well, maybe you want to roll back to a checkpoint like you're like, hey, something got messed up and this all stopped working a month ago. Do you have the configuration from 1 February that we can back up to? If you're doing the backup the way I've got it highlighted here, and again, you can see it's commented out because that it's not going to do this. But if you're doing it like this, it's just going to overwrite it every single time you run it. So you're only ever going to have that one backup, which leads us to the command that we're going to use here for the destination, right? We're going to do the show run. We're going to put the host name in here, the CSR1KV, but we're going to use this little convention here that's going to tack on the date and a lot of the date information here. And I'm going to show you how easy it is to figure out what you would get here. So on Linux, if you type in, whoops, not date with 4 Ds, if you type in date and hit enter, you can see, okay, all right, it's Tuesday, 11 April 2023, and that's the UTC Zulu time is what they refer to it as, right? 11:56:22. So what does all that stuff I've got up there mean, right? This plus $y dash m dash d underscore whatever. Well, to see that, you would just simply type in date, and you could do $capital Y. Oops, sorry. I'm going to do plus there. Pull this back. And so the capital Y stands for year. Okay, so then I know I'm going to get 2023. Well, then let's just do an up arrow and type in here $m. What is that going to give me? So that's going to give me the month. And so I'm sure that you can guess what the $D is going to give you. That's going to give you the day. But the key here, and then it goes into hours, minutes, and seconds, right? And the reason that you would do this, and this is what you would want to do in most cases, is this is going to tack that on to the end of the file name so that every time this runs in your backups directory, you're going to have a copy of the config from this year, month, day, hour, minute, and seconds. So that if you ever wanted to go back further than the latest backup, you could easily access that. And so let me say ls-l on backups. Let's take a look at the backups directory here because I've run this a whole bunch of times. So here you go. So if your boss came to you and said, hey, listen, I need you to roll back to the config for switch number 1 that we had back on like March 5th. And then you could look at this and say, yeah, no, I've got that. I've got that. And in the same sense, you could say, okay, what about, today? Hey, today at 9:32 Zulu time or 21:32, somebody made a change, but we took a backup before that, right? And that's another best practice. If you're in an operational environment, before you make a change, it's probably a good idea to make a backup of the running configuration before you make changes to it. So that way, if you made a change and something goes wrong, or you decide, hey, that's not going to work, you could always take a look at the config and say, all right, well, did we make a mistake in there, or what happened? And you have a version of the config that was good, a gold copy, so to speak, right? And so here's a copy that was taken earlier today, about 2.5 hours ago, I guess, according to Zulu time, right? Okay, so let's run this. Let's see how this is going to work. And so how do we run this? You simply say Ansible-playbook. Then you're going to give the name of the playbook. Ours is, whoops, I'm careful there. Ours is backup _ Cisco router playbook.yaml because it's in YAML format. And I'm going to show you a couple of things here. So remember, I told you that the Ansible config file that we have here in the current working directory, that is what's going to get looked at first. So let's go ahead and hit enter. And there's where you see the naming information, right? The name of the play, right? So what was the name of the play? Automatic backup of running config. What was the task, right? Or what were the tasks that we defined? Displaying the running config and capturing that to the register variable name config. And you can see it tells us, hey, that it was okay, right? We were able to do that. And then the task, what's our task? Save the output to the backups directory. Now here it says changed because I've run this multiple times. So it's just telling me the first time you do it, it's going to say okay, right? Because there's nothing in that directory. But once you've done it, it's going to tell you, hey, you've got your backup has changed, right? You've got this new backup in here that you just put in there. And we see that everything worked great. Now, remember, I didn't tell Ansible where to look for the hosts file. It knows because it looked at the Ansible config file in the current working directory. And it was in here that I had that inventory equal /hosts. In fact, if we look at that, if I say more ansible.cfg, right here is how Ansible knew, oh, okay, what's the host file that I'm going to look at in order to run this playbook? And that's how it knew. So now let's break things. So now I'm going to say VI hosts, and I promise we've got a break coming up soon. And I'm going to change the name of, and actually always a good idea here to maybe dupe the file, or I'm sorry, duplicate the line before you start messing around with it. And let me change this here, and we're going to call this Dylan's Cool CSR, right? So what I want to show you is, sure, you can name it that, right, in the hosts file, in the inventory file. But when I go to run this, remember, in the playbook, what did we say for hosts : we have CSR1KV. So here you can see right here, it says skipping, no hosts matched. And again, you can see right here, could not match the supplied host pattern CSR1KV because that's what's in the playbook, right? So whatever the host name is that you use in the inventory hosts file needs to be the same as what you have in your playbook. Again, we're using a single host. So super easy with a single host of just make sure that the name matches. So again, if I go back into my inventory file and I just wipe out that line there with Dylan's Cool CSR1KV, and we'll save this here. Let's go ahead and rerun it to make sure that, hey, I can get a backup of my CSR router. And there you go. Take a look at that. Changed. So now if I say ls, and I don't have to put the dot slash, if I say ls backups slash and hit enter, and I actually needed to put the slash in there, you'll see, where's my CSR1KVs from right about now? Or, oops, sorry, or right, oops, I got the menus are getting in the way. There they are. Right down to the seconds, right? And you can see I ran the one and ran the show CSR1KV. And so what's in there, right? What's in those? So let me go ahead and say more backups / and we'll say star 04_21 -57 -26 star. And this is just me kind of wild carding the name so that we can see what's here. And let's take a look. Yeah, it is the entire running configuration for that router. And so, and we just saw, I just blew right by the host name was right, or I'm sorry, the username was right here. So there it is, username Cisco, privilege 15, password Cisco123. Because we want to make sure we have privileges to run the commands that are in here, right? And again, there's other ways you could do this. And so there is the running config, right? So let me go ahead and clear the screen here. So let me ask, let's go ahead and check mark or checkpoint here. What questions, any questions you guys have about anything you've seen so far with Ansible? Where the configuration file is going to be created, the default configuration files and where those reside in etc Ansible, the inventory file that you would create. And I'm going to show you some advanced examples here when we come back from break. But do you guys have a good feeling? Does it make sense what I'm showing? And also, does it make sense why you would do this, right? Why would you create this Ansible backup script? Well, it's to create backups of your config in case something goes wrong. And so that way you have a good checkpoint that you can roll back to or refer to, or maybe for compliance reasons. If you're in a government environment, you've got to be taking backups, right? And they've got to be stored in a central location, all kinds of controls that exist for things like this. Is this making sense? I just want to make sure that the descriptions I'm giving and what we're talking about are making sense. All right, so Christy says yes. What about everybody else? All right, good. Dylan says it adds up for him. Dwayne, Nathan, Anj, how about you? Okay, good. All right, well, here's what we're going to do. We'll take a 10-minute bio snack break here. And we will come back at 8:07? At 8:17. All right, so let me pause the recording and we will pick back Zoom recording. All right, so we're back from break, and sorry, there's a little delay there in starting the recording back. So anyway, at the end of last week's Tag Up via Zoom, I was doing a demonstration with Jenkins, and now I got to wait for this to go away here. Hold on one second. I was doing a demonstration with Jenkins, and we went to run the build job, which was supposed to, and I've still got this up and running here in the Amazon cloud. We had the build app job 006, which when it ran, was supposed to run test app job. And remember, it was supposed to run that test. And so we're going to take a quick step back here. I'm going to go to configure because I had a typo. I had completely whiffed on the fact that what the value I had in here was I think I had the 35.173. I think I had the IP address of the public IP address of the host, forgetting that I'm running Jenkins on the same host that I'm running the container on. And if that's the case, then it should have been the container, the Docker container IP. And it was interesting because we ended the session last week and I thought about it for a good 10 minutes after we wrapped up. And I was sitting there, I'm like, yeah, why did that not work? I'm like, I'll take a look at it in the morning. And then I came down first thing in the morning and I'm like, wait a minute. The container's running on the host that Jenkins is running on. So it's not going to be the public IP address that it's going to give back. It's going to give back the container address. So that's what needed to change here, both there and there. And so now if we were to go back to the dashboard and we were to go to the build app job -006, and I'm going to click on build now. And you can see I ran it earlier today just to make sure it was still working. Let's go to our dashboard and let's refresh the dashboard. And you can see in the build queue, the test app job was in the build queue. And here you go. Last success was the build app job 7.6 seconds ago. And then the test ran and it worked. And you can see it only took 30 milliseconds. If you remember back to last week, it was sitting there, it was just running and running and running because it was timing out because the curl command wouldn't work going to the public IP address because it's running on the same host. So it just kept sitting there timing out on us. So if we take a look at the build history here, and the one that we just ran, and we take a look at the console output, you can see that it runs, it successfully connects, and we get the "you are calling me from" the Docker IP. And so that was the mistake in my Jenkins lab last week when we were kind of wrapping up. I don't know if you remember that or not. But again, I just wanted to close the loop on that. So we closed the loop on the CSR 1KV that I just built out and how it gets its DHCP address off of your local network. And then we just closed out this Jenkins build. All right. Back we go into the iMac Pro, which I think I iconified down here. Nope. Hold on. Where's it at? There it is. And actually, I want this window here. Okay. So here we are back in the Ansible directory. So now what we're going to do is we're going to make this a little bit more interesting because right now we have the ansible.cfg file that says, hey, if you're running the command ansible -playbook, and I'm running the playbook, that I'm going to look for the host file in this working directory, and the name of the file is host. Well, what if you wanted to do a different hosts file, right? So what if I was to take a look at, let's say, more group -of-hosts. So here you can see I've created a little group, right? Remember we saw this in the example configuration file where I've got multiple hosts down here. I've got the CSR 1KV, I've got ECC switch 1 and ECC switch 2, but I don't want to have to create different YAML documents inside the YAML playbook. I want the same thing to be done to all three of these hosts, and I want to refer to them simply as network devices. And remember, you could create a group called database servers if you're going to do something to all your database servers, or web servers if you're going to do something to all of your web servers. And then you just list them out just like I've got them listed out here. So what playbook would this file be related to? Well, let's take a look at more group_backup Cisco devices playbook.yaml. Now, this should look very familiar to you. This is the playbook. It is identical to the playbook that we just looked at, with one exception. Right there. That object under the playbook name, or the name of the play, sorry, that object under the play name in the playbook for hosts no longer says CSR 1KV, it says network-devices. And so what that means is when I tell it to go look into the hosts file, right, for that group dash host, right, that file that we've got that has the group created in it, when I tell Ansible, I want you to look at that hosts file and look for network dash devices, the group, and then for each of the members in that group, for each of the hosts that's listed in that group, I want you to go ahead and run the following tasks, right? Run the play, and the play is going to have some tasks, and the tasks are display the running config and then save the output into that backups directory. Now, watch what happens. So here's what I'm going to show you. We're going to say Ansible, Ansible dash playbook. And the name of this is group underscore backup Cisco devices playbook. Now, if I hit enter right now, what inventory file is Ansible going to look at? And you can just drop it into the chat. If I hit enter right now, what's the name of the inventory file that Ansible's going to use, and where is that located? So if I hit enter right now, Ansible-playbook, and then I give my playbook name, what is the name of the inventory file, and where is that inventory file located? Give that some thought. And let's see who can get that in the meeting chat. What's the name of the inventory file going to be, and where is it going to be located? So Christy's got the first part correct. If I hit enter right now, it's going to be looking for a hosts file with the name, or an inventory file with the name hosts. Because by default, if you don't tell Ansible otherwise, it's going to look at the Ansible config file, and it's in that config file that we're telling Ansible, hey, the hosts file, the inventory file I'm using is named hosts. And where does that file reside? Where do you think that file is at right now? And we talked about that before. It exists where? And let's see who can get this one. Where does that file hosts reside? So Dwayne, you're right. Yeah, it's going to be, the name of the file is going to be that hosts file, but where is it? Where's it located? So by default, if I run this right now, if I hit enter right now, it's going to be looking for a file named hosts. And where is that file at? Where does it exist? And there's 3 words I'm looking for that are going to give me the answer to where that file is. There should be 3 words. Where does it exist? See who's got that answer. So Christy, you're correct. That's where the default inventory file resides. Where does the hosts file that this command would be looking at reside? And there's 3 words. First one starts with a C, second one starts with a W, and the third one starts with a D. What do you think? Yes, Dylan, excellent. The current working directory. Remember, we have a file in this directory named hosts. So if I hit enter right here, oops, sorry, let me click that. That was in the chat window there. So if I hit enter right here, Ansible is going to go to run, and it's going to say, hey, wait a minute. I'm looking in this file right here, named host, that's in the current working directory, which your Ansible config file is telling me is in the current working directory. And I'm looking at this file and I don't see a group called network-devices. And so this raises the question, okay, well, is there a way for me to override the default behavior of Ansible here? And by default behavior, what we're talking about is when I type in the command Ansible-playbook, and I give the name of the playbook, by default, because we have an Ansible config file that says look for the hosts file in this directory, I want to override that by telling it to look for another hosts file, a different hosts file, which we can do. So you can have multiple inventory files, right? And the way that you would override the default behavior of Ansible is to put in a -i. And think of it as standing for inventory, right? It stands for -i inventory. So here's the inventory file I want you to use. And I'm going to say group of hosts. And now let's hit enter. And it might say I've got stray characters in there. But there we go. And take a look at that. So we've got the play, and then it bombs out. Oh, it bombs out on CSR1KV. And so let's examine that. Let's see why that happened. So it worked out great with ECC switch 2 and ECC switch 1, but then we get this failed here, right? We get something's wrong, something failed. So let's take a look at group dash of hosts. And so here is our hosts file. And we can see, and I'm going to actually let you guys, well, this is probably not a fair question. All right. So the problem is, or well, let me throw it out there to see if anybody, what do you think the issue is? I'll give you guys a couple seconds here. Who can see what the problem is? Why did it work on the switches, but it failed on the CSR1KV? So yeah, the error message is probably, let me roll back up. Sorry, let me roll back up here. All right, there we go. I was going to say the error message might not be too helpful to you here, but let's pull it up. So there's the error message. And there's a little help in there. There's a little help in there. So command timeout triggered, timeout value is 10 seconds. And then we saw that value in the default Ansible config file. Network debug and troubleshooting guides. So command timed out. Now, why might that command work on the two switches, but not the virtual router? And again, I'm not expecting anybody to get this unless you're paying keen attention to something that was going on earlier when we took a look at the CSR1KV. Yeah, so Dylan, you're the closest, right? So you're saying the router doesn't have an assigned IP address or DHCP, but remember it does. And so I'm going to give you the credit for this. We've got the wrong IP address in our hosts file, in our inventory file. Remember, the IP address of the router is 192.168.1.129. And so in our group of hosts, we had, move this out of the way here, we have 121. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to, and actually before we fix this, before we even fix that, let's do the following. Let's take a look, because I commented on this earlier. Let's pull the Ansible config file up. And let's take a look at one of these options down here, like retry files, right? This is going to create little retry files if for whatever reason, something fails. So we're going to set that to true, right? Because what's happening when we ran the command, because the wrong IP address is in there, it failed. So let's run it again. And let's see if we get a retry file created. So again, switch 2 works beautifully, switch 1 works beautifully. And we know this is going to bomb out, and it does. And let's type ls here. Excuse me. And am I not seeing it in here? And maybe it didn't create it. Let's check our backups directory and see if it dumped it in there. And it did not. And maybe I'm not seeing it. Let's say ls star retry. It's not in there. So it didn't create. Maybe we didn't get the right kind of error. Maybe the timeout. Maybe it's got to be a configuration issue of some kind. So, but if we had changed it to true and we generated the right type of error, we would have seen a little file with the name and .retry. All right, so let's fix this. Let's go into group of hosts, and let's come on down here to CSR1KV. We'll come all the way to the end of the line here. Whoops, all the way into that line. And we'll get the right IP address in there. And so we'll save it. And now let's rerun our playbook with a single play, which is to back up the configurations. And we use a -I to tell Ansible, hey, don't listen to what the config file says. Don't look for a file named hosts in this directory. The inventory file I want you to use is called group-of-hosts. And in that inventory file, we created a group. And in that group, we just called it network. The name of the group is network devices. And the devices are the router and the 2 switches. And so now with the correct IP address, take a look at that. CSR1KV, switch 1, switch 2. Now they say okay, and the output says changed because we've already run the script and there's already backup files in there. So now if I say ls-la, or I would say ls-l on backups, we can see in here on April 12th, right? Well, now because Zulu time's already flipped over, right? So you can see here, and this box is in Maryland. So it's already tomorrow, according to Zulu time. But here are the switch 2 backup files that we have. You can see here for April 12th, right? There's the switch 1 information. And if I was to scroll up just a skosh, see if it'll scroll up for me here. There we go. We can see the CSR1KV backup files. Now, that backup file right there, this was the comment that I was making earlier. In the lab, they're going to have you do this. And again, the problem with that is every time you run the backup script, it overwrites this file, right? It's going to overwrite that file with you're only going to have the latest copy of the last run iteration of the backup in your directory. What you would want to do, again, is something where you've got the date and the times stamped at the end of the file name so that there's no question when it got taken, when it was done. And this is something also that you could automate as well, right? All right, so that's kind of a high level of using Ansible to create backup files. So does that make sense? The group, right? If you had more than one, group of hosts. If you had more than one host, you could create a group just like this, right? Okay, so now what we're going to wrap up with here is we're going to take a look at the Apache, right? And this one is definitely the more difficult of the two, just because of a lot of the things that's required. So again, take a look. I've got an ansible.cfg file. I've got the Ansible config file in the current working directory. That's where Ansible's going to look first. What does that file say? Well, it's going to look just like the other one, right? We've got some defaults. The inventory file where I tell it, hey, this is the server I want you to install Apache on, is going to be located in the hosts file in the current working directory. And we've got the host key checking and the retry files enabled false. So we've got that stuff turned off. And then we've got our hosts file. So we'll say more hosts. And as you can see down there at the bottom, that would be if you had a group called web servers and you were installing Apache on all of those different web servers, you could easily do that, right? Now, here we have, and I'm trying to think of why I've got 192.0.2.3 in here. And hold on one second. I think I created, now I'm forgetting what I did. So servers is going to be the inventory file. And this is interesting. Let me check something real quick here. Let me do a history and grep Apache. And that did not help at all. Okay, so I'm kind of curious because, and what is it? I can't remember. It's sudo systemctl Apache to status, I think is what it is. Oh, I misspelled system. I'm just checking here real quick to see if Apache 2 is running on here. I thought it was running on here. Systemctl Apache 2 status. I'm trying to remember if it's Apache was the command. So let's do this. So if I say ifconfig -a, and hopefully I don't have to do the sudo, this should have a, yeah, so this is 192.168.1.47. Again, this device is on the local network there. And so the host file should have had, oh, whoops, remember that. All right, let's change this to 192.168.1.147. All right. So what is our playbook going to do here? So let's take a look. We've got install Apache playbook YAML. So let's take a look at that playbook. So we'll say more install _ Apache _ playbook .yaml. Again, here's our playbook. We have a single play, right? And the hosts are going to be the web servers. Now, the become : yes means become the root user, right? Because we're going to be installing Apache. So this is going to install Apache. And we're going to enable the mod rewrites option here. And then we're going to go ahead and restart Apache. And again, I'm curious why the host file had the 192.0 address in there. So let's run this and see what happens. So again, we would simply say Ansible -playbook. And this is install _ Apache _ playbook. Now, if I hit enter, it's going to use the hosts file by default. And that's what we want in this instance. So let's hit enter and let's see what happens here. We've got all kinds of stuff via SSH port 22. Because I need to start up, let's see, system CTL, or not, sorry, not run. Start. Unknown operation. Here, give me 1 second. Let me make sure that I'm doing this correctly here. So we wanted to get SSH on there. Oh, there's start SSH. I'm sorry, I got it backwards here. Start SSH. There we go. So sudo system start SSH. So SSH should be running. So I should be able to say sudo systemctl. And then I thought it was SSH status. Is it Maybe it's status SSH. There we go. I had it backwards, right? So we should be able to see the status on Apache 2. Yeah, okay, and so it shows that the web server is running. Okay, so it was possible that we didn't have SSH installed, but Apache got installed and the server is running right on this dev ASC virtual machine. So if I pull up not my school library, not the subnetting results thing, but if I was to pull this up and say local host, and not even, I don't think it needs to be 8080. Whoops, we don't want that. That was running that's the Python web app that we had. And let's see, https://localhost. Oops, I don't want that. Put the port number in there. I'm trying to get the port number out of there. No, the port number out of there. All right, so it's not showing me the web server here. So let's try the IP address 192.168.1.147 to see if we get a different result here. And we do not. So there's something could be up here with Apache. And let's see. Let me take a look at that playbook again. All right, let's take a look at our playbook again here. And I forgot the name of the playbook already. Oh, install, there we go. So we'll say more install _Apache _playbook.yaml. And there we go. So that looks good. And that's interesting that it shows that it's already running and that it says it could not connect. So let me try this again. I'll say Ansible-playbook here. And this is going to be install Apache _playbook.yaml. And it's going to use the host file. Let's see if it can't connect here for some reason. There we go. All right, so we got SSH started. So that's a good thing. I'm wondering if this is trying to use the same port possibly. I don't think it is. So the error we had the first time, it couldn't connect because SSH wasn't running. So we started SSH. Now we're connected. You can see we've gotten further. And the task came back okay. And the install looks like it should have taken place there. And if that's the case, I would anticipate, see, it wants HTTPS for some reason. Yeah, that's interesting. And let me see what we can do here. All right, so it's clearly running, and let's do the sudo system_ctl CTL, and then we'll say status Apache 2. So a little troubleshooting here to see what might be going on. What port? Apache HS2 is running. And I'm wondering why that is not cooperating. Let me do this here. Control C. And I'm curious if it was actually running on port 8080 instead of 80. Nope, it doesn't like that either. Huh. All right. So we've got Apache installed, and for some reason, it does not like, and I'm going to run that one more time. Hold on a second here. All right, let's run the playbook again. We'll have it install Apache again. All right, so that is a little different, and I'm wondering if it was because I had the Python web app running possibly on the port that Apache. So we'll do HTTP localhost. And that should not be running anymore. All right, I'm wondering if we've got, I apologize here. I'm trying to figure out why we're not seeing the Apache page that we should be seeing. Local 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 host. And we don't want the 777 port number in there. And it's interesting that it still thinks that it can reach the application, that little Python web app we had going. All right. So we've got it. It's been installed. And for some reason, and maybe it's looking at the old config file. So, or not, I shouldn't say the old config file, but the config file that's going to be installed when we do this Apache options, right? So we'll wrap up with this here in the hopes that this is going to fix it for us. So we'll say Apache options.yaml. And this is the one that's, it's 8081. That was the port number. That might have been the problem. Let's try 8081. No, it didn't like that either. Okay. All right, so we're going to run this here. We're going to run the playbook, and this playbook here is looking at the web servers, right, inside that hosts file, the group web servers. We're going to install some mod rewrite, and then we're going to do some regular expression work here to change the port that Apache listens on from 80 to 8081. And that's what those lines are doing. So let's run this and see. Oh, sorry, not playbook. So I want Ansible-playbook. And we're going to say install Apache options. And let's hit enter and see what happens here. And hopefully, when this is done, we should be able to hit that server on port 8081. Okay, so everything went well. We've got green lights all the way down. So I should be able to come down here and we should be able to hit http://localhost:8081. And we should see the Apache, whoops, oh, got an extra zero in there. So we're going to say http://. For some reason, it's lagging and then putting multiple characters in there. So we want localhost LOCAL. And I just want to change that last character to a 1. And what we should be greeted with, success. There we go. Okay, so that is what we should be greeted with, which is the Apache 2 Ubuntu default page. And so it's possible that I don't think it was the Python web app running that was causing the problem. I think it was something with the Apache maybe already having been installed. But there we go. It is working. So let's recap, right? Ansible. It's an infrastructure automation tool, and you saw just how powerful it is. We can install Apache. We can tweak the Apache config. We can we can back up our Cisco networking devices, right? If you can do a show run on the device, we can back it up with an Ansible playbook. Super simple. We saw how we could tag on a date timestamp to the end of the name, right? So let me ask you guys, what questions do you have? And you all have the instructions on getting the virtual machine, the new CSR 1KV installed. And remember, be wary of the IP address, and you could just do a show IP interface brief to get that. But you should be good to go for this week. Any questions?
Yeah, so I was just able to open the DevAc lab environment on the other laptop I have, but it doesn't, it's very slow. It doesn't allow me to work fast. I can't even open Chromium web browser.
You're saying that it doesn't allow you to work fast. Is it because there's not enough resources on that laptop?
Yeah, because like my Mac is my main laptop. I'm able
Right.
to get other virtual machines on it, like Kali and all that. But since I cannot use VMware because of the M1 chip,
Gotcha.
it's it's actually very hard for me to do this.
Yeah. So I'll communicate with you offline about that, Anj.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. All right. What other questions do you guys have? Or does everybody feel like they kind of understand how Ansible works and the playbook and the plays and the host file?
I have a question.
Yes.
So over the break, I was working on downloading the CSR 1000B, the virtual machine. I was able to get it. I mean, I just can't get it to run. So I was just wondering if I can reach out to you separately because I was having some issues getting it to run. I can't use VMware. I have to use VirtualBox. So
So why is it that you can't use VMware?
So I tried to use VMware and it told me my license expired. I guess it was from another class.
Okay,
So,
so you do know that you get free VMware as a student at Anne Arundel Community College.
oh, I didn't know that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you guys all get free VMware.
I
Okay.
actually my can you all hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. So I went to the website because mine also expired, the On the Hub website, and for some reason when I clicked on the VMware stuff, it looked like it was all gone. So I was also having that issue.
Yeah, so the email that came out, you should be able to respond to that email. The one because you guys get an email, correct, that gives you the information on how to log in. Is that correct?
To VMware?
To the site where you guys would download the VMware.
Oh, okay. I was it at the beginning when we started the class? I'll have to go back and see.
Yeah, no,
I
it
guess
would
because
have
I
been
was
from
using
the
VirtualBox.
it would have been from the school.
Ooh, I don't know
Yeah,
if I
so
got
there
that.
should
I'll
have been.
have to look.
And so here's what I'll do. I'm going to reach out to Mary right now and let me see if I can get the information. But when you guys log in, you should be able to either get a new license or just simply download whatever the latest and greatest version is. And then they should give you a license so that you can use it.
Do you prefer us to use VMware versus the VirtualBox?
I do. I think VMware is
Okay.
much easier to work with, but VirtualBox should work. It's just that VMware is much easier to work with.
Yeah, I mean, I got everything downloaded, but I would get to the boot screen and then it would just sit there. And if I hit a button, it just said failed.
On
So
VirtualBox.
on VirtualBox.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I'm not a
Okay.
huge fan of VirtualBox. I know why they put it in there is because it's free. But as students of Anne Arundel Community College, you guys should get VMware for free. So I will look into that. I'll get that licensing thing sorted out immediately. And I'll get you guys the link that you can use to go in and download the VMware. Sound good? You guys still there? All right. Well, if there are no other questions, let me go ahead and